They laughed at him before he even said a word. Not because of what he believed in, but because his blazer had holes near the elbows and his shoes had more history than polish. The courtroom echoed with murmurs as Jeremiah Cole stepped through the double doors, clutching a frayed briefcase like it carried the Constitution itself. He looked like a man out of time, like the recession hit and never let go. But the confidence in his walk dared anyone to look past the dust on his lapels and into his fire-lit eyes. Jeremiah had been assigned to defend Malik Thompson, a 19-year-old black teen arrested for allegedly stealing a car he legally owned. The arresting officer, a white patrolman named Curtis Vance, claimed Malik was suspicious because he didn't seem like someone who could afford a BMW. The state provided Jeremiah as a public defender, not by mistake. They thought this was just another easy conviction, another file stamped closed. But they didn't know what Jeremiah had buried beneath that old suit. They didn't know that this trial would become the storm that washed their sins into the light. As he approached the defense table, the prosecutor Tanner Mills, young, smug, perfectly groomed, whispered under his breath, didn't know Goodwill had a law department. The courtroom chuckled. Even the stenographer smirked. But Jeremiah didn't flinch. He merely opened his file, spread his notes, and leaned toward Malik, who sat beside him with cuffed hands and frightened eyes. "You ever seen a lion in a rusty cage?" Jeremiah whispered. "Doesn't mean it ain't still a lion." The trial began with opening statements. Tanner's voice rang clear and assured, painting Malik as a liar, a manipulator, a youth with a long record, conveniently omitting that Malik's only offenses were loitering and jaywalking, both of which were citations disproportionately issued to black residents in his neighborhood. When it was Jeremiah's turn, he rose slowly. There was silence. Everyone waited for the awkward clearing of the throat, the nervous stammer. But instead, Jeremiah locked eyes with the jury. "This case isn't about a stolen car," he began. "It's about who society thinks deserves to own one." Whispers. A few jurors stiffened. "I've been a lawyer for 12 years," he continued. "In that time, I've seen justice wear many masks. But the ugliest one is the one we pretend isn't there." Objections came from the prosecution, but the Judge Harold Meacham, a seasoned but visibly tired man in his 60s, gestured for Jeremiah to continue. Over the next few hours, Jeremiah dismantled the state's case. He revealed body cam footage that showed Malik unlocking the car with a key fob footage that had been marked irrelevant by the prosecution. He exposed Officer Vance's prior complaints, 7 of them all involving young black men. He presented character witnesses who testified to Malik's integrity, his college scholarships, his dreams of becoming an architect. But what broke the courtroom was Jeremiah's cross-examination of Officer Vance. "Officer Vance," he said calmly, "do you recall the make and model of the vehicle?" "Yeah, it was a silver BMW 3 Series." "Did you ask Malik for identification?" "He didn't have any on him." "Did you ask for vehicle registration?" "He said it was in the glove compartment." "I didn't believe him." "You didn't believe him? Why?" "He didn't look. He didn't look like he belonged in that kind of car." Silence. Then Jeremiah leaned in. "You mean he was black?" "No, you mean he was black," Jeremiah repeated louder. "And that, in your mind, equaled guilt." The courtroom was stone still. Even the bailiff blinked. Jeremiah turned to the judge. "Your Honor," he said, "how many more times must we explain to the law what it refuses to admit? That bias is not a ghost, it is a fingerprint on every gavel that slams too fast." Judge Meacham looked away, but Jeremiah wasn't done. "Let me tell this courtroom a story," he said, stepping from behind the defense table. "My father was a janitor. He scrubbed the floors of this very courthouse for 22 years. And every day he wore the same shoes, the same soles, holes in them so wide you could see the stitching of the earth. And every night, When he came home, he told me to stand taller than the world expected. Let them laugh at your shoes, son, he said, but never let them laugh at your truth. Jeremiah turned back to Malik. This young man is not on trial because he committed a crime. He's on trial because he doesn't fit the story that Officer Vance and men like him want to tell about people who look like us. He looked again at the judge, then at the jury. I may not wear $1,000 suit. I may not dine in country clubs or vacation in Aspen. But I know the law, and I know justice. And if those are measured by thread count, then this courtroom has no soul. A pause, then a slow creak. Judge Meacham stood, not because he was told to, not for order, but because something inside him long dormant had stirred. A truth, perhaps, a guilt, or maybe just a recognition that the man in the old brown suit had just put them all on trial. The room was still, not just quiet still, the kind of stillness that presses against your skin like humidity, the kind that makes you afraid to breathe too loud. Jeremiah didn't move. He let the weight of his words hang, heavy and deliberate. Judge Meacham's hands rested on the bench, white-knuckled. His face was unreadable, but his eyes betrayed something. Not sympathy, not yet, but awareness, maybe even shame. Continue, Mr. Cole, the judge said, voice strained. Jeremiah gave a small nod, then returned to the defense table. Malik watched him, wide-eyed, as if seeing his lawyer for the first time. Jeremiah whispered, "We're not done." The prosecution called their final witness detective Hannah Rouse. She had a reputation for being sharp, cold, and by the book. She recited the details of the arrest with professional detachment, claiming she reviewed the evidence and found it sufficient for charges. Jeremiah watched her closely. She never looked at Malik once. When it was time for cross-examination, Jeremiah stood again. "Detective Rouse, how many car theft cases have you overseen?" "Dozens," she replied. "How many involving young black males?" "I don't have that exact number. But would it be fair to say most of them?" She hesitated. "Statistically, that's common, yes." "Why?" "Because car theft is common in lower-income areas, in which communities are overwhelmingly policed as lower income." She shifted. "I can't speak to that." Jeremiah paced slowly. "Let me rephrase. When a white teenager drives a car he didn't pay for, you call it a gift from daddy. When a black teen does the same, it's probable cause." "Objection," Tanner shouted. "Sustained," said the judge, but his voice was quiet. Jeremiah didn't stop. "Detective, were you aware that Malik Thompson's mother co-signed for that vehicle?" "I was informed later, yes." "Later, after his arrest, after you cleared the evidence for prosecution, after he'd spent 3 nights in jail?" "Yes." "Do you regret that decision?" "I followed procedure." Jeremiah stepped closer. "Procedure isn't justice. It's routine. And routine, when built on rotten foundation, becomes the blueprint of oppression." Rouse didn't respond. Jeremiah turned to the jury again. "This isn't about a mistake. It's about expectation. They expected Malik to be a criminal. So when he wasn't, they still made him one." When the state rested, the courtroom recessed for the day. Jeremiah sat in the empty courtroom long after everyone had gone. The silence was comforting. He could finally hear his own heart again. Malik's mother, Vanessa, approached him. She was a woman who looked like she'd aged a decade in 3 weeks. "Thank you," she said, voice trembling. "No one's ever fought for us like that." Jeremiah shook his head. "I'm not done fighting yet." She looked at his suit, eyes softening. "Your daddy must be proud." Jeremiah smiled faintly. "I like to think so." That night, he walked the streets back to his tiny apartment. He passed luxury stores, bars with glowing windows, men in tailored suits sipping bourbon they didn't have to explain. A life out of reach, not because he wasn't good enough, because the ladder had always been chained. Back home, he opened a letter from a private firm. A rejection. Another one. We are currently not expanding our diversity hires at this time. He laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so damn predictable. He hung his coat, made tea, sat in the dark, rehearsing every word for the closing argument that could either free Malik or break him. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed with a new kind of energy. Local media had caught wind of the trial. A few reporters lingered in the back rows. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but that didn't stop whispers from spreading. Did you hear about that lawyer's speech yesterday? Yeah, made the judge stand up. Jeremiah ignored them all. He rose for closing arguments, straightening the same brown suit that had become its own kind of armor. I want to tell you a final story, he said to the jury. A few years ago, I defended a kid like Malik, accused of robbery. The evidence was thin, the witnesses unreliable, but the jury convicted him. When I asked why, one juror said, he just seemed like the type. He let the silence settle again. Malik Thompson is not on trial because of what he did. He's on trial because of who we're taught to fear. His skin, his posture, his clothes, his address. All of it reads guilty to people who never bother to read deeper. He held up a picture, a birthday photo. Malik, age 17, holding up a model of a skyscraper he designed for a school project. This is who you're deciding the fate of. A kid who builds dreams. And if you convict him, you're not just destroying his future. You're sending a message to every young black boy in this country that no matter how good you are, how clean you live, how bright your future is, that we will still find a cage for you. He looked each juror in the eye. You get to choose the message today. You get to decide if justice wears a blindfolder if it peaks. He sat down. The judge gave the jury their instructions. Then the room emptied. Everyone waited. For hours passed. Then 6. Then 9. By evening, the jury returned. Jeremiah stood. Malik stood beside him, hands shaking. The foreman rose. On the charge of grand theft auto, we find the defendant not guilty. There was no outburst, no celebration, just silence. Jeremiah let out the breath he'd been holding for 3 weeks. Malik collapsed into his mother's arms. She sobbed quietly, clutching her son like she could press him back in her womb and keep him safe forever. Jeremiah nodded once, then gathered his notes. As he turned to leave, Judge Meacham called out, "Mr. Cole." He stopped. The judge stepped down from the bench. Slowly, carefully, like every step meant something. You reminded this courtroom what the law is supposed to be. Jeremiah didn't know how to respond. The judge extended his hand. "Thank you." Jeremiah took it. The handshake lingered. The courtroom froze. Then applause broke soft, scattered but real. From the back rows, from the court clerks, even from the bailiff. Tanner Mills didn't clap. He just gathered his bag and left without a word. Outside the courthouse, Jeremiah stood beneath a gray sky. Rain had started to fall, thin, cold, but honest. Malik came up beside him. "You don't even know me," he said. "Why'd you fight so hard?" Jeremiah looked at him, eyes tired but alive. "Because they tried to break me once, too, and someone fought for me. Now it's my turn." Malik smiled. "Your suit's still ugly, though." Jeremiah laughed. "Yeah, but it's got heart." They walked into the rain together. No parade, no cameras, just two men free. And in that moment, Jeremiah Cole's old suit felt like the finest thing ever stitched, because it had carried a man through fire and come out righteous. The next morning, headlines didn't mention the suit. They spoke of the speech that made a judge rise, a public defender who out-argued a system, and a young man who walked free not because of mercy, but because of truth. Some called Jeremiah Cole a modern Atticus Finch. Others said he was lucky. He knew better. It wasn't luck. It was pain turned into purpose. He arrived back at the courthouse, not to stand before a jury, but because Malik's case had unearthed something bigger, a case that had long been buried in silence. Judge Meacham had requested a private meeting. The judge's chambers were dimly lit. The walls were lined with old books, heavy and untouched. Law that had once promised equality now yellowed with disuse. Meacham stood behind his desk, hands clasped. "I've reviewed Officer Vance's history," he said without preamble. 7 use-of-force complaints, all dismissed, all involving black suspects. You forced me to look at records I've ignored for too long. Jeremiah stayed silent. Meacham gestured to a folder on his desk. "This is a file from 5 years ago. A boy named Deshaun Walker, arrested for resisting. No weapon, no crime. Just attitude. Same officer. Same assumptions. That boy's in prison now." Jeremiah picked up the folder, flipping through grainy photocopies. The boy's face was younger than Malik's, but the fear in his eyes was the same. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked. "Because I want you to represent him on appeal." Jeremiah blinked. "You're asking me? I'm giving you what you've earned." Jeremiah laughed bitterly. "I didn't ask for your favor. I asked for justice." Meacham's eyes hardened. "You think I don't know that? You think I sleep easy knowing I upheld laws that never asked the right questions?" "I stood up that day, Mr. Cole, because for the first time in years, I remembered what it felt like to feel human in this job." Jeremiah paused. The weight of that moment wasn't lost on him. "Deshaun Walker's case is broken," the judge continued. "But maybe you can fix it." He took the file. "I'll try." As Jeremiah left the chambers, he found a young woman waiting by the elevator. She was dressed in a sharp navy suit, clipboard in hand. Her posture was confident, but her eyes studied him with something close to reverence. "Mr. Cole, I'm Sarah Lynn. I work with the Southern Justice Initiative. We've been following the Thompson case. Your closing argument. It's already being taught in classes." Jeremiah blinked. "That was fast." She smiled. "Truth travels quicker than silence these days. We'd like to offer you a position lead civil rights litigator. Full resources. National cases. You be in courtrooms across the country." Jeremiah looked down at his suit. Still the same. Still worn. And then at the file in his hand, Deshaun's face staring up at him from within. "I appreciate it," he said, "but I've got another case first." She handed him her card. "The offer stands." He tucked it into his coat pocket and stepped outside. The sun had returned, and with it, a city that moved too fast to notice small victories. But Jeremiah did. Malik met him for lunch. He'd started an online fundraiser, "Thank You, Jeremiah Cole," to buy his lawyer a new suit. It had already raised $8,200. Jeremiah laughed so hard he nearly dropped his sandwich. "You know," he said, "I wore this suit to my first trial. It was second-hand even then." Malik grinned. "You could frame it, like a war relic. I'm not retiring it yet." "You planning to die in that thing?" Jeremiah smiled. "I plan to live in it." Later that week, Jeremiah met Deshaun's mother. Her name was Laverne. Her hands were rough, her back bent, but her spirit unshaken. "My son didn't stand a chance," she told him. "They said he looked angry. He was 17. That's just how his face was." Jeremiah read the transcripts. No evidence. No weapon. Just words like aggressive, threatening, non-compliant. He read the same words again and again in report after report. Bias doesn't always wear a hood. Sometimes it wears a badge and fills out paperwork. Jeremiah filed the appeal. He worked through the night. Through 3 nights. Dug up video footage, school records, witness statements buried behind bureaucratic red tape. He called in every favor he had. On the 4th day, he stood again in court, different judge, different jury, same suit. He argued that Deshaun had been convicted not on fact, but on fear. "Fear," he said, is the easiest excuse when you've never been taught to see humanity in someone who doesn't look like you. He played footage of Deshawn's arrest. The boy was calm, cooperative. He asked why he was being arrested. The officer shouted, grabbed him, slammed him. The jury watched, grim. By the end of that week, Deshawn Walker was released. Laverne wept in Jeremiah's arms, repeating thank you over and over until it felt like a hymn. Reporters waited for quotes, for a triumphant statement. Jeremiah only said, "One life saved doesn't undo the ones we lost, but it means something." After that, everything changed. Jeremiah Cole became more than a lawyer. He became a symbol. A viral photo spread him, in a brown suit, walking down the courthouse steps with Deshawn beside him. The caption, "He doesn't wear justice. He carries it." Students painted murals. Law schools quoted his cross-examinations. Civil rights leaders reached out. Donations flooded the public defender's office. But Jeremiah never left. He stayed, because the work wasn't done. He represented single mothers evicted unfairly, black teens wrongfully accused, immigrants threatened with deportation. One night, Malik came to visit. He brought Jeremiah a box. Inside was a new suit custom-tailored, dark navy with a soft gray lining. Hand-stitched initials on the cuff. JC. "It's time," Malik said. "You've earned it." Jeremiah ran a hand over the fabric. It felt like clouds, like silence finally made gentle. But he shook his head. "Not yet." Malik frowned. "Why not?" Jeremiah looked at the brown suit hanging near the window. The sun caught its seams. It shimmered like history. Because some battles aren't won in armor. They're won in scars. And so he kept it. Because every stitch was a memory. Every tear a name. Every fray a lesson. And because the people he fought for didn't need a polished hero. They needed someone who looked like them, hurt like them, fought like Helen, kept showing up anyway. Jeremiah Cole sat in his office well past midnight. The building was nearly silent, except for the soft buzzing of a flickering light in the hallway and the hum of an ancient radiator. His desk was stacked with folders, each name on the label a person the world had nearly forgotten: wrongful arrests, racially biased prosecutions, broken public defense promises. But tonight he wasn't reviewing files. Tonight he stared at the framed photograph on the wall, his father, mop in hand, smiling in front of the courthouse steps. The same courthouse Jeremiah now entered every morning as an advocate, not a custodian. His phone buzzed. A message from Vanessa Thompson. Malik was accepted into Columbia. He's going to study architecture. He said he wants to design courthouses that don't scare people like him anymore. Jeremiah smiled softly. Tears welled up, but he blinked them back. The war wasn't over. But moments like these little victories stitched into the fabric of pain were why he kept fighting. He reached for his old briefcase, the leather so worn the stitching had turned white, and opened it one last time that night. Inside was the speech he was due to give the next morning. He had been invited to speak at Howard University's law school commencement. The room was packed when he arrived. Students in black and crimson gowns waited with wide eyes and held breaths. The faculty introduced him with thunderous applause. But Jeremiah didn't approach the stage in a fresh tailored outfit. He wore the same brown suit, the one they had mocked, the one that had made history. He took the podium and adjusted the microphone. "Let me begin with something true," he said. "I did not become a lawyer because I love the law. I became a lawyer because the law didn't love me." Silence fell, thick and total. When I walked into my first courtroom, they laughed at me. Not for what I said, for what I wore, for how I looked. They didn't know I'd come armed with the truth. And that truth didn't need a polished suit. It needed a spine. He looked out at the sea of future attorneys. Some would be civil rights warriors, others corporate advisors. But each one, he knew, would be tested. "They will underestimate you," he continued. They'll dismiss you. They'll try to shrink you into something palatable. Don't let them. Don't let the system turn you into a ghost walking its halls. You are not meant to disappear. You are meant to disrupt. He paused, then slowly removed his jacket. I wear this not because I have to, but because I choose to. Because every rip, every threadbare patch reminds me of who I serve and who I am. The students rose to their feet. Applause thundered. Some wept. Some cheered. Some simply stood, silent in awe. Later, a young student approached him outside. "Mr. Cole," she said, clutching her diploma. "How do you keep going when it feels like the world's already made up its mind about you?" He looked at her. Really looked. "You tell the truth anyway," he said. "And you wear your scars like a badge." She smiled. And in her smile, Jeremiah saw the same fire he once had, the fire they tried to extinguish but failed. In the weeks that followed, Jeremiah's impact spread beyond the courtroom. Law students across the country began wearing brown to trial advocacy competitions as a symbol of integrity over image. A local artist painted a massive mural of him in the city's historic district, Jeremiah standing tall in his courtroom, the judge rising behind him, and his old suit glowing like armor forged from history itself. Below it, in bold letters, read, "He wore justice, even when it didn't fit." Then, something unexpected happened. Officer Curtis Vance, the same man who had arrested Malik, was indicted by a federal grand jury. Civil rights groups, emboldened by Jeremiah's exposure of systemic patterns, had pushed for deeper investigations. Body cam reviews, whistleblower reports, and years of buried misconduct came to light. Jeremiah didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He simply whispered to himself, "One less cage waiting for the wrong boy." But even as progress marched forward, resistance reared its head. He received threats, hate mail, accusations of race baiting and unpatriotic behavior. Conservative pundits mocked his courtroom style. One viral clip featured a commentator laughing at his old suit and calling him a poverty prop. Jeremiah didn't flinch. He knew change made people uncomfortable, especially those who had never been forced to live inside discomfort. Then came the call that changed everything. The governor of the state was assembling a new oversight committee, one that would evaluate racial bias in the justice system. And he wanted Jeremiah Cole to lead it. At first, Jeremiah declined. "I'm not a politician," he told them. "I'm just a lawyer with a stubborn soul." But his mentor, retired Judge Eleanor Riggs, called him personally. "You're more than that now," she said. "You've become what they need, even if they don't know it yet." So he said yes. The first hearing took place in the same courtroom where Malik Thompson had nearly been convicted. Now, Jeremiah sat not at the defense table but at the head of the panel. Lawyers, judges, law enforcement officers, advocates, survivors, all came to testify. A black mother from the suburbs spoke about her 10-year-old son being handcuffed for looking suspicious at a grocery store. A public defender broke down in tears, describing the moment she realized she'd lost 12 clients in 1 year to sentences 3 times longer than their white counterparts. A retired police captain confessed to falsifying records to protect the department's image. Jeremiah listened to them all, never interrupting, never rushing. At the end of the final hearing, he stood before the room. "We are not here to clean the surface," he said. "We are here to uproot the rot." The reforms that followed were sweeping. Mandatory bias training, independent review boards, funding increases for public defense, statewide audits of racial disparities in arrests and sentencing. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was movement. And in a system designed to resist change, movement was revolution. One day, years later, Malik visited Jeremiah again. He was in his final year at Columbia. Tall now, confident, wearing a blazer with his own initials on the inside. "I wanted to show you something," he said, handing Jeremiah a rolled blueprint. It was a design, a courthouse, open concept, glass walls, no bench higher than eye level, spaces for children, prayer rooms, gardens, a courthouse that sees people, not just cases, Malik said. "I call it the People's House." Jeremiah stared at the drawing for a long time. Then he looked at Malik. "You built something they can't tear down," he said. Malik smiled. "I learned from the best." That night, Jeremiah finally did something he hadn't done in years. He put the brown suit away, not in a closet, but in a glass display in the lobby of the Southern Justice Initiative headquarters. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "This suit stood for those who couldn't," worn by a man who made the system listen. The next morning, he put on the new suit, not because he wanted to hide the old one, but because the fight had evolved. And so had he. He walked out of his apartment, briefcase in hand, heading toward another courtroom, another battle. And though the world still had miles to go, something had shifted, because Jeremiah Cole had taught them all a truth too powerful to forget. That justice doesn't shine because it's new. It shines because someone carried it, even when no one else would. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.